Welcome to WTFRed, the only AskReddit channel that will blow your mind. Like and subscribe right now to support Pepe's career as an independent musician. r/AskReddit. Hey Reddit, what's the strangest coincidence you've ever personally experienced? Here in my little town in northwest England there's a good kebab shop from which the lads and I have ordered for years. We've been in there after countless nights out and had them delivered to our doors. So we know the guys who work there pretty well. They are mostly Turkish. Once a few of us got together for a short break in Turkey. Having got off the plane, we waited in the car park outside for another pal who'd been on a different flight. As we stood, soaking in the ambience of a new country, none other than the tall guy from our local kebab shop walked across the road right in front of us. 2,000 miles from home. That was weird. My wife and I were in Tucson visiting my mother who just moved there. My wife decided she wanted tamale. We drove around for 2 hours stopping in restaurants looking for tamales. Couldn't find one. Went back to my mother's apartment. Literally 2 minutes later somebody knocked on the door of my mother's apartment asking us if anyone wanted to buy any tamales. One year I got a roommate through Craigslist. The guy was weird for sure, but good natured and paid rent. Anyway, after about 2 months of living with him my cousin comes over to hang. I introduce the two and my cousin in the most chill voice ever said, "Nah man. We know each other." Turns out they were college roommates 5 years earlier in another state. Not me, but a pretty interesting story in my family. Two of my great grandfathers got imprisoned in the same jail and served time together. My great grandfather on my mother's side was an architect and even drew my other great grandfather's house. My sister, Emily, was on a ski lift in New Mexico when some younger girl across from her asked if her name was Emily. Apparently the stranger, who kind of looked similar but underage, had found her lost ID the year prior and had been using it for a year to buy alcohol. Edit. After this blew up I texted my sister who reminds me it was weirder. She was later hiking with friends for 17 hours. They got tired, thumbed for a hitchhike and got picked up by this girl's twin. I moved from my small hometown halfway across the country to a small city where I knew absolutely no one. At the first party I went to in the new town, I started chatting with a guy. Turns out he had also just left my small hometown. I met a Canadian guy while on holiday in South America and we ended up going sightseeing together. At the end of the day a person behind us tapped him on the shoulder and asked if the scar behind his ear was from cancer surgery. They got talking. Turns out they were from the same small town in Canada. Had the same type of brain cancer and had been operated on by the same surgeon. Was at the dentist getting a crown extension. Dentist: "Hey, you were born on the 13th of July. So was I." Assistant: "Me too." We all shared a look of surprise and longing with each other. Longing to be closer. Then they drilled the absolute fuck out of my teeth. Edit. Oh god. It's happening again. Had a kidney transplant last year. Nurse makes a comment about it having my name on it. He elaborated to say that the donor has the same surname as me. An officer from a different PD was showing me a picture of a guy they wanted to arrest in a different part of town. As I looked up from the computer, I see dipshit riding by on a bike. Literally 5 feet away from the squad car. 2 years ago I was in Tokyo on holiday. I looked on Instagram and saw an old friend post a story showing he was also in Tokyo. We hadn't spoken in a few years, but I sent him a message letting him know we were in the same city. Not even 5 minutes later, we walked into a bar and he was standing there. This past November, I was in Toronto on business. After dinner, we went to a pub downtown. The first person I saw when I walked in was the same friend from Tokyo. We both live in Winnipeg. Seeing Paul McCartney, The Beatles, on TV in 2001 and noticing he was tall. Next day I'm walking down a very quiet street and walking towards me is a really tall guy. And it was Paul McCartney. He must have seen my expression so he veered my way. Stuck his hand out and said, "Hi mate." I was shocked. 18 years later I'm still shocked lol. Edit. I'm 6 feet 1. Turns out he's 5 feet 11. Maybe he was just lanky. He certainly appeared tall to me. I should also add that he didn't just stick his hand out. I meant to say he shook my hand. Crazy. He then briskly walked away. A very brief encounter but a really important one for me. I also wouldn't blame anyone for not believing me. It's a weird story. Told this story elsewhere but I'm making you all read it again. Was at a convention. There were only a few people in the room. My friend and I wanted an autograph from a voice actor. He started singing in his character voice. There were two random guys next to me. One pulled out a video camera to record it. Years later, my husband and I are talking with friends. And the convention comes up. The guy with the video camera was my husband. I also took a picture later that day of the crowds. And he is in that picture. I stood next to my husband years before I met him. Edit. Thank you to everyone who shared their stories. Amazing how our lives can intersect. And a big thank you to the Redditor who gifted silver. It's a major award. I have an uncommon last name and a not too common first name. I was in the hospital for a surgery and the person in the next room was there for the same surgery. Come to find out that we were second cousins and never knew that the other existed. He had the same name as me and his wife had the same name as my wife. Pastor of church where I was musician informed me that a wedding couple would be coming to see me after Sunday services to discuss music for their forthcoming ceremony. It turned out to be a girl I dated in high school that I hadn't seen or heard from since graduation and her fiancé. She remembered my organ playing from back then and already knew what pieces she wanted. I didn't even have to demonstrate. I've had several small world experiences but the biggest was talking to a girl after my first university class and discovering through the course of a 2-hour-long conversation that our grandmothers had been each other's maid of honor and my aunt and her mom were best friends since childhood. Back in the early mid-90s the phone system changed and you no longer needed to dial the area code for a long distance in-state call. We're a small state with only one area code. One morning I woke up to the phone ringing and when I picked up I recognized the voice on the other end as belonging to my old boss from a few years ago. She had an unmistakable voice. We had a nice conversation for a bit before she realized she had dialed the wrong number. I lived in a different town in a different part of the state. But the number must have been off by only one digit from the one she'd tried to call. To add to the coincidence, I had overslept and would have been late for work if she hadn't called me and woken me up. Both of my grandfathers were named William and both grandmothers were named Joyce. Started dating this girl a few weeks ago. We get to talking about where we live etc. She lives in not only the same building but exact same apartment I lived in 2 years ago. It was so fucking bizarre walking into my old apartment that I never thought I would see again. What are the odds? The person who sits next to me at work copies everything I do except she has no way of knowing. I wear a blue sweater. She wears a blue sweater. I bring leftover spaghetti. She brings leftover spaghetti. It is so weird I almost hate her. When I was 18, I lived in a town a very long ways away from where I ended up moving. I struck up a friendship with this guy from work in that town. We play Halo, watch movies, act, and he was awesome. I ended up moving suddenly due to a family emergency. And never got his contact information. I didn't even remember his name a decade later. But I thought of him often as he was an awesome guy through all the years. 11 years later, I'm working at my job, carpooling with someone from my training class. And one night he asks if I mind his roommate being in the car as he was going to take the car after we got off at work and use it for the night. He introduces us. I turn around. And in the backseat is the guy from the town a very long ways away. We reconnected immediately. And now live together. He's my best friend. For sure. And the godfather to my children. I was a kid. Around 13. I played a lot of a video game called Diablo 2. I started a clan with a few people I'd met on the internet and we played every day. At some point we were helping some random person and he asked to join. We thought he was nice enough so we let him in. As part of this clan we had a shared account we used to store game items for each other. After about a month of playing this new guy goes in and changes the password. Steals the account and defriends everyone. Completely disappears off the map with all of our stuff. Fast forward a year later and my family moves to Texas and it's my first day at school. I'm sitting in algebra class talking to the person in the seat next to me and he mentions he plays Diablo. I said me too and that I ran a clan and everything. I asked his username and it was him. 2,000 miles away from where I first virtually met this guy, he's sitting next to me in math class. When I told him mine, his face went into total shock and he didn't know how to respond. It was awkward for sure. Ended up telling him I didn't care and was over it, but let's just say we didn't end up becoming friends. I used to get 2 buses home from work. I got off the first one having left my phone and keys on the front seat of the bus without realizing. Got on the second bus. Went to my favored front seat and my possessions that I didn't know were missing were waiting for me. The bus had changed driver and route. Still freaks my nut out to this day. When I was 1 year old, we moved to a city some 500 kilometers away from where I was born. 15 years later my father decided to put me in a boarding school in the area of that first city, because he went there too. I got randomly put in a room with 2 other guys. Which one of them is still my best friend Toady. When I first visited that friend at his home, I discovered that he not only lives in the same city as we did, not much of a coincidence, as it's the only major city in that area, but in the same fucking house. OFC, I couldn't remember our old house. So I called my father to confirm that it's the same address and it turns out that he very briefly knew my friend's family from selling the house. Edit. I hate you, and Toady said I'm totally right with that. Last summer, I went to New York with my family for a week. A friend of mine that I hadn't seen since she graduated from college was living and working in New York at the time. So we decided to meet up for drinks. As we were walking through Times Square at 11 PM on a Saturday, who did we see on the other side of the street but another friend of ours from college. I knew he had been living in New Jersey, but he was in New York for a Grindr date. The 3 of us went to a bar and talked about life and how none of our friends live in Ireland anymore. They've all moved abroad. It was bittersweet and a crazy coincidence that 3 friends from a small university in Dublin would serendipitously meet in New York City. When I was a kid while hiking with my dad, I was babbling and said, "The teacher told us if you speak too much a fly will get in your mouth." In the exact moment a fly flew into my mouth. Recently moved cities and had a new local phone number. Had to make a lot of calls to various utilities, etc. to get everything all set up. I call one of them. I'm speaking with the customer service rep. All is going fine until she asks for my phone number. When I tell her, she starts freaking out on me. "Who are you? How did you find me? How do you know the phone number?" kind of stuff. Eventually managed to get her calmed down to the point where we could figure out what was going on. Turned out she had been in an abusive relationship where her ex had stalked and harassed her, including him and his friends, making threatening calls constantly. Eventually she had moved to a different part of the city and taken a new, unlisted phone number. My new phone number was her old one. And the moment I said it, she assumed he had tracked her down once again and the harassment campaign was about to begin anew. I'm not sure she truly believed me when I explained it all, but we eventually got through the phone call. When my best friend and I were around 16 years old, we both had a bunch of coins we were taking to Coinstar at Kroger. We had the exact same total in coins. To the penny. My best friend in high school had the same exact locker combination as me in a school of 1,200 people. Saw a combo written on a piece of paper of his and I asked why he wrote down my combo. He looked confused and said that's his combo. The combination locks are changed and reassigned each year. Edit. Miss you, buddy. I don't know if this counts as a coincidence, because it might be influenced by the commonalities between us, but I was reading through one of my dad's old journals and found out that he and I share the same reoccurring nightmare. The details are basically identical, even down to the frequency of it happening once a month. It's very trippy. Edit. Just to answer some facts. As far as I can remember, I never discussed this with my dad. I felt okay perusing his journal because he's been dead for quite a while now, before his time, but having nothing in common with the details of the dream. It was suicide. I guess you can make of that what you will. I've detailed the dream itself below. I was 18. I dated a girl who went to a private school. She told me they were having a dance, so I thought, okay, great. It'll be a nice night. She told me that only boys from a specific boys' private school were allowed to come because of an incident once when they let everyone in. Some girl got really drunk and puked on the headmaster's shoes, so they limited it to one boys' school after that. Fast forward 12 years and I'm with my fiancée, different girl, at a wedding shower. I overhear my wife, I was so embarrassed when I puked on the headmaster's shoes. I yelled, that was you. That's awesome. I love you even more now that you're famous. TLDR. My wife cock-blocked me 12 years before we met. In freshman physics, I became friends with the Japanese kid next to me. After a while he was helping me with my Japanese homework, did really well after that. BTW. But after that class, we kinda drifted apart. Fast forward 2 years where I'm an exchange student in Japan over the summer and doing some sightseeing in Kyoto after the program. I'm crossing the street in Kyoto and I hear my name being called out. I look around and there he is. Thousands of miles apart we meet again. We got some drinks and good food together. It was a blast. No. His hometown was not Kyoto. He was also doing sightseeing while home for the summer. Edit. My first gold. Thank you, kind internet stranger. Friend's grandpa was friend of my grandpa during the Vietnam War. They recognized each other at my high school graduation. They went to the same school. Now their grandchildren are in the same school. Nobody believes me when I tell this story. But one day my husband and I ran into the same couple at 3 different places. In 2 different states. So my husband and I had an errand to run out of state. We leave early and stop to get breakfast. The couple was sitting across from us. The lady had on a funky shirt, which is why she stuck out in my mind. After breakfast we drive the next state over to the office we have an appointment at. We're waiting in the lobby and the couple from the breakfast joint walks in. Weird. So we spend the day finishing up our errands and then we drive back home. I didn't feel like cooking, so we stopped to get some dinner at the pub. We sit down at a table and guess who's already eating at the table behind us? The same friggin' couple. I had recently graduated from a large state school and found a room in an empty house to rent. Since I was moving from my college apartment, I didn't have furniture. And I decided to grab a dresser a previous occupant had left in the basement. It wasn't anything crazy looking. But it wasn't a basic mass-produced IKEA dresser either. Something a bit older. But not antique. 3 of my friends helped me move it upstairs while we were waiting for a 4th. The 4th friend arrives. Walks into my room and stares at my dresser for a long time before saying, "Why do you have my dresser?" It turns out her parents had donated her childhood dresser to Goodwill. And the previous occupant of the house was from the same tiny town she was and had got his dresser at that Goodwill. And my partner were looking for a car. We wanted a Subaru Impreza and found one for our price range on our street that had my 3-letter initials for its license plate. The seller was a high school friend of my partner. A classmate of mine sent a fake email that looked totally legit to select members of my class saying that we had failed a really important exam which carries bad consequences for our career. After we freaked out, he let us know it was just a joke. And when the results came out a week later, there was only one person who failed. My classmate that sent the fake email. I wanted my husband to accompany me down to the parking garage in our building to grab something from our car. He was already in his PJ pants and didn't want to come. I convinced him no one would see us. And he reluctantly agreed. We got on the elevator and rode down 1 floor before it stopped to let someone on. The largest, buffest man steps into the elevator wearing his own PJ pants. He said nothing, but gave my husband the dude head nod before getting off on the main floor and disappearing forever. We've never seen him since. This before on Reddit, so I'll just copy paste. But definitely the shadow dick incident. One night in university I was fooling around with my then GF and noticed that the brightness of the TV caused us to cast distinct shadows on the wall behind us. Being 19 and a fool, I took this opportunity to take a pic, using Snapchat, of the shadow my erect penis made on the wall and sent the pic to my best friend. I thought it would elicit an interesting reaction but could not have prepared for what was next. You see, on Snapchat you can see when someone receives your message as well as when it's opened. So as my message is sending, still unopened by him, I receive a Snapchat from my best friend. I open it and lo and behold, what do I see? A shadow dick snap. This man decided at the exact same time that I did to send an identical pic of his dick's shadow on the wall. Both of our GFs were confused, thinking it was some inside joke, when in reality we had never spoken of or sent shadow dicks ever before. TLDR. Decided to snap a pic of my dick's shadow to my best friend at the exact same time he decided to do the same. Edit. It's cool, guys. We said no homo. I was browsing beauty products I've never heard of on the internet, when suddenly out of nowhere my dad, who was in South Korea at the time, FaceTimed me to ask if I wanted the exact same product I was looking at. He was in a Laneige store. When I was in HS, I saw a guy from my class in Washington State while on vacation. I wasn't too fond of him, so I didn't say anything. 2 days later we were in Canada and I saw him again. We both live in Florida. For over a decade I very rarely remembered any of my dreams. One night, I had a very vivid dream that I was busted by the cops for drug possession and was sentenced to prison. The dream itself was agonizingly paced as if in real time. Days turned to weeks, to months. The pain of losing everything and everyone in my life had sent me into catatonic despair when all of a sudden, I awoke. I instinctually checked my phone only to find a ton of missed texts, emails, and phone calls from a friend who was arrested for drugs that night while I slept and had been trying to get me to bail him out. I got a new computer and was scrolling through pictures on the old one with my little brother. I had a picture of 2 butterflies, one blue and one yellow, on a large purple flower. I loved this picture and always thought how lucky I was to get it. The colors were so vivid and the butterflies too patient to let me get 3 shots in before they flew away. My brother was in awe of it and I said, "Wow, you really like this one?" He pulled out his phone and said, "No, I took this photo." Sure enough, he had been to the same park the summer after I took my picture. His had the same species of plant and butterflies, in the same park, and around the same area and time of day. What are the chances? This was years ago. I'll have to see if he still has his and I'll try posting them later. To Egypt and randomly met a good friend of mine in the middle of the desert. I'm not talking at the pyramids. I mean, we were in the desert and I was like, "Is that Jenny?" Double quote. Halfway across the world. In the middle of the desert. Away from anyone else. That was weird. I was in St. Augustine on vacation. On the way there I just happened to think about this girl I knew back in college in Orlando. Just sorta wondered what she was up to and the like. Sure as shit I ran into her in a bar there the first night. She was there celebrating graduating from PA school. TLDR. Bought old pants at Goodwill. 10,000 kilometers from home. Appear to come from hometown. Full story. I went on a 3-week trip through Costa Rica. 4 years ago. I needed to buy a new pair of shorts since I didn't bring enough. We couldn't find any regular clothing stores. So we ended up in a place where second-hand clothes were sold. They got their clothes from all over the world. Wherever people collect clothes for the less fortunate. We call it humanitas over here in the Netherlands. There are collection bin all over the country. I bought an ugly pair of cargo shorts. In one of the pockets, I found a 3-year-old festival token. A festival that takes place is 20 kilometers from my home. I'm sure it wasn't mine, because I never went to that festival. So these pants came all the way from my hometown to Costa Rica, only to be flown back there by me. I was best friends with this girl in preschool. After that we didn't go to the same schools, so we lost touch. Flash forward to my junior year in high school and I meet this girl. I'm walking her home one day and we pass that preschool. We both realized we went there and figured out that we were the friends back then. We've now been together for 15 years and will finally be getting married in October for our 16th anniversary. I was about 3 or 4 and my grandpa took me for a walk. Suddenly, I had this very intense feeling of synchronicity. Without thinking, I raised my palm in front of me and in that instant bird's poo landed right onto it. The strangest part was, I knew that this is going to happen. Can't really describe it. But it was strangely the most perfect moment of my life. BTW. Sorry for my English. Edit. Row. My first silver. Thank you. Knew a girl in high school that was just the worst type of person. Take too long to explain all the reasons, but a big one is that she tried to drive a wedge between my bestie and I. She moved away after high school. My friend and I would bring her up occasionally and talk about some of her worst qualities and say how glad we were that we never had to see her again. One time, as we were doing so in a restaurant, suddenly she appeared right next to our table. She'd come back to visit someone and just happened to be right where we were right as we were discussing her. So awkward. It was 5 minutes of awkward and then she left and we just sat there like, da fuck. Met my doppelganger who lived one street from me. In his room there was a symbol on a few drawings which was the same symbol on the leather keyring my sister gave me a few weeks before. He grew up in a city neighboring mine and experienced the same mental health issues. Apparently being too alike is not desirable for a relationship : Copy pasted from another thread, but my whole existence is a strange coincidence. Turned 6 on the 6th of June 2006. I was born at 6:06 PM. I'm 6 feet 0. And before you ask, no, I don't have 6 fingers on either of my hands. One summer when it was blazing hot, I was leaving Home Depot and there was a guy panhandling at the exit. I gave him an ice cold water out of my lunch cooler and went on to my job. When I got there, the homeowner was like, "It sure is hot today. Would you like a water?" He brings me out the exact same kind of bottled water I just gave away. Stupid, but with all the brands of bottled water there is, it just was like, damn. The universe just gave me my water right back. Me and my best friend in college. Right off the bat clicked. Then at odd times our spidey senses kick in and we share the same thoughts while being across the country or even across the pond from each other. The biggest weird out we had was when we both bought cars only to find out we had bought the exact same car. Model, year, color, and all. Starting college after the army, and when I'm getting my college ID pic taken, they're doing a story on the new college IDs. 2 days later, my ID mugshot pic is on the bottom of the front page for their story. 3 years of straight quarters and a couple of major changes, I've tapped out my GI Bill benefits. So I transfer to another school where I have a better shot at getting employment while working. Go through registration and my new school happens to be doing a story on their new ID cards. And guess who gets on the front page of his new school paper? End my 15 milliseconds of fame. But mom was proud. I was at work when my boss's son called and asked if we had an extra Ethernet cable he could have. We didn't. An hour later, a customer walked in and asked, "Do you guys need any Ethernet cables? We had a bunch of extra ones that we can't use at work. And we'll just throw them away unless we can find someone to give them to." Edit. I swear I know the difference between son and son. And a friend took some acid one night and were tripping hard. Decided to walk to a gas station and get some smokes or something. We walked by a car lot in the small town I'm from and all of the cars in the lot were cop cars. We were both walking ramrod straight all the way to the store. Very quietly bought whatever we went there for and took a back street back to his place. We just stared at each other for like an hour and didn't speak after we got there. Turns out the city had bought a whole new fleet of cop cars and they had all been delivered there and were on the lot for just that night. From Canada. When I was 20, I went to Australia to travel for 6 months. While I was there, I ran into a couple guys I had went to college with in the same hostel I was staying at. They didn't come with me when I went to the bar that night. But I ended up walking back with 3 other Canadians. While chatting to them, I mentioned the other 2 guys I knew in the hostel by name. Let's call one Cyrus. One guy stops dead and says Cyrus' last name. Turns out, my friend was his childhood best friend he hadn't seen in 12 years. We went and woke him up at 3 AM for a very cool reunion. One night in college I had a dream that my best friend was in trouble and he was calling me for help, but I couldn't reach him in time. The next day I found out he had been killed by an IED in Afghanistan that night. Edit. Thanks dudes. Just happened yesterday. My boyfriend was diagnosed with the same rare 150,200 Americans health condition I have. Freaky. I was dating a girl who happened to be Jewish. The family likes to bits my chops about not being Jewish, so I mentioned an obscure Jewish sounding surname from my grandmother's side. Her and her mother went pale. TLDR. I probably banged my cousin. Have to. 20 years ago my family and I lived in Germany. My folks and sister lived there about 12 years prior before I was born. One day my mom, sis, and I are walking in an open marketplace and my mom says, I wonder what happened to MRS. Ziz. You know that lady who babysat you, sister, when you were a baby? Not 10 minutes later my mom stops a random woman in the market and says, excuse me, are you MRS? Ziz. Yup. Hadn't seen her in over a decade. Happened to find her right after saying her name. The other one just happened this week. I'm a teacher and usually have music playing in the classroom as kids walk in. I have Smooth Criminal by MJ playing, and a kid walks in saying, whoa. This is the same song my iPod played as my alarm this morning. Less than a minute later, a different kid walks in. Whoa. This is the same song my Sonos played as my alarm this morning. Of all the songs possible, me, Apple, and Sonos chose the same one on the exact same day. When I was a kid, someone in my family broke a glass vase on the wood floor. My mom cleaned it up as best she could but wanted us to wear shoes in the kitchen for a few days just in case she'd missed some. And she continued sweeping to try and get the last little bits. I was loudly complaining about the injustice of having to wear shoes in my own house when I stepped on that final piece of glass. We ran into two old classmates in a roadside cafe in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia 10 years ago. For reference, that is 10,000 kilometers, 6,200 miles from home. So that is definitely a well, what are the odds kind of situation. Hadn't seen them in years and I had no idea they were even there. Ended up hanging out for a day or two. Few years back while I was working in a little pub, a couple of two-seater tables next to one another were finishing up at the same time. I got them both their checks, and both parties decided to split their bill. Upon trying to close them out, I realized that not only were the amounts split identically down to the cent, but each table had matching sets of cards, at least by the final 4 digits. That is, table 1 had a charge of 28.79 on card ending 1000 and another for 28.78 on card ending 5008. Table 2's charges were identical, down to the cent and last 4 digits on both cards. I've never gotten over how unrealistically improbable it all was. Was on holiday in South Africa and I met someone who lived just round the corner from me, in the UK. Another time I was on a ferry to France and I saw one of my teachers. I started hanging out with my girlfriend. She invited me over to her house, and it's the first house I ever lived in. Her grandmother, who lives down the street, was friends with my parents. She worked for a doctor who delivered me. Fast forward a little bit. We're sitting around looking at some of her old family pictures and there's this one of a 4th of July parade in my neighborhood. There was a little boy in the picture that they didn't really know who it is, but it looked an awful lot like me. I asked my dad and he remembers that day where he took us to our old street to watch the parade. When I was a toddler I had wandered into my future girlfriend's family picture, sitting in a restaurant about 200 miles from where I live, telling my mother, who was visiting from a different country, about a trip I had to another country, about 6,000 miles away, with a work colleague. And the lady at the table next to us leans over and says, I think you're talking about my son. Turns out I was sitting next to my colleague's parents while showing my mum pictures of our trip. Have to. So first off, I met my oldest current friend when we were 14. When we were 17 we discovered we were born 3 hours apart. I demanded to see ID because I thought someone was playing a joke on me. Seriously. I made my friend show ID to prove it. Took us 3 years to figure that out. Secondly, I ran into my cousin in California at an airport. Neither of us were flying home. We hadn't even spoken in weeks. But we had layovers at the same time at terminals that were right next to one another in a different state. It was so fucking weird. We took a picture to prove it happened. When I was a kid, we had this plush penguin that would play jingle bells if you squeezed its stomach. One Christmas, It got broken so that it just kept playing the song endlessly. This went on for hours. My mom tried stuffing it in the couch cushion, but we could still hear it. Finally, I got super annoyed, grabbed the penguin, and said, "This is really annoying. Could you please stop?" It stopped immediately. Next grade, my parents sold the house and we moved about an hour away. Said goodbye to all my classmates and all that. A month after we moved, the kid I sat next to in my old school moved in across the street. A few years back, my dad went on a trip to Denmark for a business trip. My mom, being Danish, decided that she was going to come along. She had always heard stories about the side of the family that never moved to America, but she had no idea where they lived or if any of them were still around. Anyway, after a week in the country, my mom and dad are driving down a country road when their car got a flat. There wasn't really any cell reception, so they actually wound up walking up a driveway a bit to ask the locals to use their phone. They walk up the steps of this little cottage, knock on the door, and an elderly woman came to the door. Her eyes lit up, fixed on my mom, and wound up giving her a hug. My parents were understandably confused as the old woman's husband was also excited to see my mom. The couple didn't really speak any English, but they led my parents down the main hallway to their guest room. There, on the dresser, was a photo of my mom and her brothers from their high school graduation. The old couple were my mother's great aunt and uncle, the ones that never came to the USA. To this day, my parents still can't explain it. I was planning on ending my life, then someone made a post somewhere about giving free Steam games. I clicked on it to see what it's about and saw their profile having a in memory of then another user's profile. Their friend's profile who died 10 years ago. Then I go to their profile and see all their friends constantly posting on their profile every year on their birthday, or Thanksgiving or Christmas, everything. They made sure to remember him, and at that moment I realized that I also probably have people like that who'd be so sad if I'm gone, and it made me think of things differently. When I was younger, 8-9 years old, my family and I were at a water park on vacation nowhere near where we lived. As we were walking around the park, we found a pair of sisters that were wearing the exact same swimsuits as me and my sister. The girls were the same ages as my sister and I as well. I always thought it was crazy. While traveling solo in Asia, I went to a remote Buddhist temple and bumped into someone I knew from my hometown. Unbelievable. Of all the places in time and people on this earth, I meet a girl I know from home. One freaked me out as a child. When I was about 12 years old, my family and I flew to Hokkaido, Japan to go snowboarding. We were having breakfast at the motel we stayed in, and a man couldn't help but notice that we were speaking both English and Japanese, grew up bilingual, and he came to say hello. He also understood a little bit of English and we had a short conversation. Fast forward to the next year in a small island called Saipan, Guam's sister island. And we used to live there. My classmates and I went to the local donut shop to get some donuts. And what do you know? The same man we met in a small motel in Hokkaido was sitting in the corner drinking coffee and eating donuts as well. Our eyes met and the look on both of our faces were priceless. We talked a bit for a while and mentioned how small the world is and all. Very nice man. But never met him since. About 20 years ago, I was taking the Amtrak from Baltimore to New York. I was reading some kind of thriller novel, and about 5 minutes after I read about the protagonist casually noticing the giant whale mural on the side of a building in Wilmington, Delaware, I glanced out the window just as we were passing that same mural. Not an exciting story, but it was complete coincidence. Mom and I went to Nick for a week one summer when I was in high school. We lived in CA. Her youngest cousin, also from CA, was a PhD student at NYU at the time. But we didn't tell him we were in town because she had work. He might be busy, etc. On our way somewhere we took the 6 train the wrong direction and realized after 2 stops and got off somewhere in midtown to switch sides. Lo and behold, there is her cousin standing on the platform looking at us in disbelief and saying hi. My mom's nickname. He was going somewhere out of his ordinary routine and we should never have been at that stop. It was awesome and we all saw Avenue Q the next night together. Grade 10 English class. The teacher didn't have anything planned for us to do and it was close to the end of the year, I guess. So she goes to the big cupo board in the corner and pulls out a stack of copies. It's examples of a successful essay written during a final exam. So we can learn what a good one looks like and how to build a narrative, etc. The topic of these was, what was the most pivotal moment of your life? There's 3 examples, ranging in proficiency. We read through the first 2. And I volunteer to read the last one aloud. I start reading. And I stop. The essay was about me. My big sister had gotten a really good mark 6 years earlier on her final exam essay, which she wrote about the day I was born. I got pretty emotional about that one. Have to. First was in Mexico when I was 16. At the resort. There is a spot to paint pottery and I was there as my dad, who was sitting across from me. Next to us was another father and his daughter. They were both from our hometown. I asked the daughter what high school she went to and it turned out to be the high school my recent ex went to. It turns out she did. She is his girlfriend. It was crazy and we both thought it was so cool. Meanwhile our dads are finding it so strange and we're confused why an ex and a current girlfriend were excited to meet each other. The second coincidence was at my work. One of my co-workers was my same age and it turns out his birthday was 2 days before mine. I asked him where he was born. He was born at a military hospital in Oklahoma. The hospital I was born at. We were both in the same hospital. The same nursery. Just feet away from each other. It was one of the coolest moments in my life. Mom and I went to England in 2016 for the first time. We were on the top tier of a double-decker bus. I was sitting in the back. Mom was sitting in the front. She struck up a conversation with the lady in the next seat. Turns out she taught at my high school in NC. I never heard her. I was a band person. She taught home ec, so her class was never available to me. But she was there while I was. She now has her own tour company. Next day we were standing in line at the Tower of London. Mom strikes up a conversation with the Americans in front of us. Turns out they also lived in our small town for a while, Elizabeth City, and his son, also with him, went to Sheep Honey Elementary, where my youngest sister went. He would not have been there when she was. Small world. Worked half day. Drove 6 hours from Southern California to Northern California for car camping with my wife. Chose obscure campground which was neatly deserted, off season. Picked the most deserted and remote campsite location. We planned on rocking the tent. Were bummed after setting camp and another couple selects site right next to us. Turns out to be a co-worker I'd spoken with earlier that day. Edit. I hadn't told co-worker anything about plans. We weren't close. Earlier that day we spoke briefly of work-related issue. Thanks for tuning in for this WTF Red episode. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the one and only AskReddit channel that will blow your mind every time.